Okay, Father. Well, first of all, before we start out, let me say hi to everyone who's joined us, and those of you who will join us during the process of us live streaming, and those who will join us later as they connect with us. Let's see. I know that Celia was trying to hook up because I got a text from her, and hopefully she'll be signing on soon. So, given that, let's open in prayer, and then we'll get launched. Thanks, Father, for yet another opportunity to interact with things related to your word and your work in our lives and in the lives of those around us. And may we be clear in how we respond, how we interact, and clear in how we think through these various issues that can impact our lives in a lot of different ways, as well as enable us to get a better perspective on just how you did work in our history in the past. Thank you, because of Yeshua. Amen. Now, I will say to begin with, we got a lot of questions. Usually we get 0, 1, or 2. This time, I think we were up around a handful or a half a dozen.
We haven't been on for a while.
Yes,
so.
but that's true. We've not been on for close to I think 3 weeks or whatever, and that means we will not get to all the questions. In addition, I realize that there was a little more that needed to be said about one of the questions we had from the last time we were together. I forget exactly how the question was raised, but it had to do with how do we know what books are the right books in the Bible?
Yeah, what about those other books that were not approved?
Yeah, what about those other books that were not approved?
And who did the approving anyway?
Yeah. My PS on that's going to be reasonably short. I just wanted to mention, because I think I started to mention towards the end, the various standards or processes that were in place to bring about what we call the canon. We talked about some of the books that were in and some of the books that were not in. And just as a reminder, in the Jewish Bible, the books that are there have been considered to be canon or text or biblical or authoritative, whatever term you want to use now. The technical term is canonical. Ever since the time of Ben Sirach or Ecclesiasticus, which is 1st or 2nd century before Yeshua. And that ordering of books was, again, the same that you see in the Newer Testament, and you also see it in Josephus. The issue then really, and by the way, the books that became part of the Apocrypha only became part of the Apocrypha, if I recall correctly, sometime in the mid-1400s.
Oh, BCE or CE?
CE.
CE.
Apocrypha, yes. CE, of the Common Era. So those are later editions. That's not when those books were written, but that's when those books were added by some groups, specifically the Catholic Church, to the canonical scriptures. Now, let me take a brief pause to see if our friend Celia has been successful. Okay, she says she's given me a thumbs up, so hopefully she has joined us, because she is one of the ones who did ask some of the questions, one of the questions that we're going to be dealing with tonight. So back to the books that got in and the books that didn't get in. What were the criteria that were used by the early followers of Yeshua to decide? There were several criteria that were employed or compared with the body of literature claiming to be authentically apostolic. And there are 4 criteria. I think I only mentioned 3. One is apostolicity. In other words, the documents were either written by an apostle, or one we would call apostle, or one of the shlichim, or the disciple or associate of one. And part of the reason for the importance of that is when Yeshua said in John chapter 14, concerning the promise of the Spirit, he said to those who were with him at the Passover table at that time, and when that Passover Seder took place and where that Passover table was, actually relates to a couple of the questions that were submitted to us in the last couple or 3 weeks. Anyhow, John chapter 14, Yeshua said when he would leave them, he would send the Spirit of truth, the Ruach Hashem, the Spirit of God, to guide them, teach them, and remind them of everything he had taught. That gift of the Spirit, although people often apply it to themselves today, and that role or function of Spirit was specifically for the apostolic circle, hence apostolicity. So that...
Somebody made up that word, because that's the first time I've ever heard it. It's sort of cool.
Yeah, it is sort of cool. I won't take credit for making up that word.
Apostolicity.
Yeah, okay. Or, like I said, a disciple or an associate of one. Why a disciple or associate of one? Because then the apostolic stamp could be on that writing and that person because their connection to the apostles. Okay. Now, having said that, that qualification fits every one of the books of the Newer Testament, that criteria. Second is historicity. In other words, the test of prior usage in the community. That means this particular book had a track record, if you would have it, within the early community as being part of the authoritative documents. Third, reliability. Well, what's the difference between historicity and reliability? Historicity has to do with the history of its usage within the community. Reliability, if I might separate the two out, is can we count on this being historically accurate? Okay? That's sort of a related subset. So reliability. In this case, the material in the written texts was compared with what's called in the literature the kerygma, Kerygma. In other words, the apostolic preaching and teaching that was conveyed orally. So, did it match up? Was it consistent with that which they had been received and listening to orally down through the years? And then there was also comparison with other written texts that were already considered part of the accepted group of authoritative or canonical literature. Any questions? Okay, good. Then hopefully I've been reasonably clear.
Very dense. It's
that's why
it's very dense stuff.
It is somewhat dense stuff, but these are important criteria. Look, and let me say something about the kerygma or the apostolic tradition. This relates to what we know of the background of the Second Temple period, and that is that the people of that day learned by means of memorization. Education by memorization was the way in which things took place. Even some 400 years after Yeshua, Jerome could say concerning the people of Bethlehem, and Bethlehem at that time, although an important location, was not necessarily a major city, so this would not have been a major or a cultural center, so to speak. But even in a small town such as Bethlehem, Jerome could say, and I'm quoting, "Every Jewish child in the street knows the whole of the history from Adam to Zerubbabel." Talking about the biblical text, the biblical history. You all know where Adam occurs. That is, in fact, in the beginning.
They start at age 3.
Yeah.
To memorize. And the first book they memorize is Leviticus.
And you figure if you can memorize Leviticus, the rest is going to be smooth sailing.
As a 3-year-old, yeah.
So, Adam occurs in Genesis chapter 1. Where does Zerubbabel occur? Zerubbabel occurs at the very end of the Jewish order of the Older Testament. He occurs 2 Chronicles. All right. It's convenient for us as English speakers to say, so they knew the whole of the biblical text from A to Z, Adam to Zerubbabel. Of course, since that was said in Latin and it referred to stuff in Hebrew, it may not work out quite so nicely. But so they had it all. The point is, they had it all memorized. That means they could pass on accurately material that they had heard and had been taught. All right.
Yeah, I mentioned this to my Hebrew class a couple weeks ago, but the value of memory, we've lost it. It doesn't have a lot of value because we value written documents more than we value oral stuff, because we think it's much easier to fudge a little on the memorization part than it is to fudge on a written document. However, back in biblical times, they felt the opposite was true. The opposite being, it's much harder and more accurate to get a bunch of eyewitnesses in the same place and have them attest to it. Yes, I saw this happen. I heard this being spoken, rather than they thought you could fudge written documents much easier. So it really is somewhat difficult for us to understand their value system and what they wanted to put their emphasis on. It's always, when they have a chance, it's always been, who saw this and what did they say they saw, or what did they say they heard?
And in fact, the Pharisees of old so mistrusted. Let me change that. The Pharisees of old so understood what Patrice has just said that they considered it more highly accurate and reliable to pass on material orally than to do it in written fashion. So much so that for maybe up to a couple centuries after Yeshua, the Pharisees refused to have their teachings written down for fear that the writing and the copying would distort the actual message. That's how well attuned these people were to memory and to passing things on orally. So, reliability, comparison with what was passed on orally, the kerygma or the apostolic tradition or teaching, and then comparison with other books that were already accepted as authoritative. So, then there is, and I don't know that this is used in the literature, but it's a term that I have used in dealing with this subject. And the term I'm using here is authenticity. And by authenticity, what I'm talking about is what some people have talked about as the inspiration nature of the documents, namely its affect and effect on the readers. As you look at the texts, you don't, as you read these texts, you don't encounter wild inventiveness or fanciful speculation, as you often do in the Gospels that were not included. Either the kind of stuff that the book and movie The Da Vinci Code was based on, or one of the more recent authors, Pagel's The Gnostic Gospels is the title of her book. The stuff that's often called lost Gospels. When I was doing my graduate work I did graduate work at several places. At one of the institutions, Trinity Evangelical Divinity School, I was studying under a very well-known and respected Newer Testament scholar. And during my sessions with him, I said, I asked a question about the so-called lost or lost or excluded Gospels. He said, how could they know which ones were the right ones and which ones were the wrong ones? He looked at me with half a smile and said, why don't you read them? And I read them, and it took me all of about 2.5 chapters to distinguish the material that was in these Gospels as compared to the Gospels we have.
And as I've said quite a few times, are you concerned that works were left out of our Bible? Are you concerned that certain books have been suppressed and there's really knowledge in there, but they won't let us see them? Please go to your local public library and you can read them anytime you want. They are not secret. They are not suppressed. They do not give us any information that we don't already have or that is maybe even accurate, but it's some person's fanciful ideas about what they think it was like.
Okay. On this particular issue, what I've called authenticity, in other words, they carry what you might call the weight of authenticity, or what's inspirational nature, as others have put it. The great theologian Albert Einstein gets the last word on this particular criteria. I deal with this more in the courses I teach, the Gospels in their Jewish context. That's coming up in the fall. And in the course Apologetics we taught a year ago. Here's what Einstein had to say, almost 100 years ago. This was an interview with the Saturday Evening Post. All right. No one can read the Gospels without feeling the actual presence of Jesus. His personality pulsates in every word. No myth is filled with such life. How different, for instance, is the impression which we receive from an account of the legendary heroes of antiquity like Theseus and other heroes of his type. And I will add here, including the Gnostic Gospels or Gnostic accounts, lack the authentic vitality of Jesus. Einstein was not a follower of Yeshua, but he understood the issues, and he was sharp enough to be able to assess and distinguish and enable us to better see what the issues are as well. Fair enough?
I thought you were going to say Einstein is not an expert in literature, but I'm glad I was wrong.
Yeah. Not known for theology, but yeah.
Not known as his number one subject.
The point is, here's a man of extremely high intelligence and perspicacity.
Yes.
You like that?
Wow, I haven't heard that in ages.
I'll write it down so I'll never use it again.
I can't say it now either.
Yeah.
I know it when I read it.
So there we go. So much for the PS or the
PPS.
I was going to say the
postscript.
I was going to say the epilogue to our discussion from before.
The sequel.
Now, there is another question that came in that we did not get a chance to get to.
Oh, you want me to go right there when I'm not awake? It's all right.
Well, I was taking them sort of in order.
Okay.
That we did not get to because we ran out of time. And that question is, this is a question that can get us into trouble.
Oh, I guarantee it will.
You guarantee it will. She guarantees it will. All right. That means that some of you, either those who are with us or those who hop on board later, either through Vimeo or through YouTube later, here it is. What does the Bible say about abortion as applied to Judaism? Now, this is a hot topic, and undoubtedly what we're going to say may offend some people. But here we go.
Oh, it's going to offend some people.
Okay, fair enough.
Abortion as applied to Judaism. Abortion as applied to Judaism. There is no statement either for or against abortion in the Tanakh at all.
Or in the Newer Testament.
It's not spoken of. I will, if I get this far, I'll mention what it is. Although right now I don't know the chapter and verse, but it's okay.
No, I can't. I don't know it either.
Your answer that you may have, not my answer, but your answer, anybody's answer, to what they think about abortion and how it applies or does not apply to the Bible is going to depend on your answer to one question. When does life begin? That question is not answered in the Tanakh, and it's not answered in the Newer Testament. So, what is your assumption, or maybe you've thought through it, what is your assumption as to when life begins? Prior to about 30 years ago, Everyone pretty much said it's a mystery. If you've been pregnant, if you've had children, men are, like one step back. Mainly, except for the women who get filmed for, I didn't know I was pregnant, and they go into a bathroom and have the baby. I think they're a little bit berserk myself. I don't know how you could not know you were pregnant. Of course, that was my experience. Each baby may be different. In fact, I would bet money that it's different for each baby. What? Well, what about fertilization? We're not told in the scripture ever about any kind of fertilization. We're not told an awful lot in the scriptures. If you think that life begins at the fertilization of the sperm and the egg, then you are really, really dealing with mysterious and unknowable time frame and moment, and you're dealing with ethereal matters. I've known, and you know too, women who haven't known they were pregnant until 6 weeks, 3 months, almost 3 months on. I myself knew I was pregnant like the next day, but once again, that is weird and unusual, and I know I'm very weird and unusual, and it wasn't anything that I would have bet money on, but I had a sense. When does life begin? That's the question. Now, I will tell you the Jewish answer. Go ahead, dear.
To be very, very precise, when does actual human life begin? Because because somebody could say, well, the sperm and egg are alive. But
no, they're not.
But I mean, some people argue. But so when we're talking about life, that's what we're talking about.
Yeah. Okay. So people, and I've heard lately. So lately means in the past 3 or 4 years, I've heard people, men. These have all been men who say something like, well, women's eggs are holy. And I'm just going, let's stop right there, Sparky. Let's stop right there, right there. Are women's eggs important? Yes, they are. They are not holy. And neither is men's sperm, but I never hear about that. I never hear anything about the men and what they've done wrong or how they've lived their lives or what bad decisions they made. I only hear about women. Okay, putting that aside. Where was I? Can't remember. Very important. Oh yeah. The Jewish viewpoint is this. A baby is considered a person when they breathe air on their own. That's when they're considered a person and different rules apply to them. Prior to that, they're seen as part of the mother. And you can understand where that thinking comes from. First of all, number one, prior to like the mid-19th century, like almost 2.5 baby, there's no half babies, but it's almost a 2.5 babies out of every 4 die. They die in their first 3 years. That was normal. That was expected. It's tragic. And they felt it was tragic, but it was expected. That was the norm. It's only been in more modern times that babies tend to be able to be helped and to live. Now we've even got the operations that take place in utero. But the Jewish faith and the religion does not talk about hypothetical things in their minds, because you could not be sure a baby was alive until they came out of the womb and breathed on their own. Now, we've both known people who, what? Go ahead.
Don't hold your thought.
Sorry.
Breathed on your own. Are you also saying Not just took a couple breaths and then died, but breathed on and continued.
Yeah, I don't know the hypothetical breathe a couple breaths and then die, but are able when
they were viable.
after the umbilical cord is cut, even though it doesn't say those words in the scriptures, it's or in the Talmudic material, it's after they can breathe by themselves and don't need to be attached to mom. Now, prior once again to the 20th century, we didn't know how long a baby would live without its mother, but now, earlier and earlier, they not only do operations in utero, but they also have cesareans. And remember, cesarean is because Caesar was supposedly born by being carefully cut out of his mother's womb. That was not normal, but they saw that as, yes, this is a very fine thing to do. But the rule still would have been, can they breathe on their own? And not because they're attached to an umbilical cord. That's very, very late for, millions of Christians would say. All right. So where did we get this idea that life begins at fertilization? We don't get it from Protestant theologians. We get it from Catholic theologians. Catholic theologians, by definition, are men. And it's all a mystery to them. So, it all depends on what you say. But I wouldn't, in the past, up until the 20th century, it has only really been, I know women who are pregnant say, the baby isn't moving. Oh, the baby can move without being alive. It could, hypothetically. Yes, would you say that's correct?
Under the influence of fluids and
or
motion.
whatever, gas. I'm just going to speak of myself. So you have gas when you're pregnant, and the baby hates that and wants to move around. If the baby is not alive, quote unquote, at that point, movement in itself does not mean life in the womb, because that would mean that if that you don't feel movement, then the baby's dead. Where was it going to go? Anyway, that's my bottom line. It all depends on where you define life as taking place. I maintain it's not necessarily at fertilization. That's sort of silly. Because we also know that of all the eggs that are fertilized, only a quarter of them plant themselves in the woman's womb and have the opportunity to become alive. The other 3 are gone. They act like another cell in your body, and they're gone. They're expelled sometime, and they're gone. That means there are so many deaths. So many deaths every day. Do you really want to go down that path? Do you really want to heap guilt onto women who, for them, their pregnancies don't work? They would have to think, babies are dying in me every month. What have I done wrong? It's not just we can't have a baby, but there's death. My body has death in it because these fertilized eggs are disappearing, and we don't. They probably go down the toilet. I'm so ashamed. Do you see how it's not healthy? And I don't think you can support this concept, because then the women get the blame when it doesn't work. As you all and I know that it's been very easy to give women the blame on a lot of these things. And it's also very easy to say that we need to punish them. if
like
their
go right.
their living baby dies at 6 weeks along. It's horrific. It's terrible because they're not being nice about it. It's blame. It's all about the blame. And it's all about they decided. It's not in the scripture. And I have not known any of these people ever to say, I wonder what Jewish people and I wonder what the Older Testament says about this kind of thing. Here's what the Tanakh says in relation to a woman who is pregnant. And this is where I don't know the chapter and verse. So a situation is portrayed in that a man strikes a woman who is pregnant. It's not her husband. A man strikes a woman who is pregnant. She loses the baby. Therefore, he's a murderer and he should be put to death. Oh, guess what? It doesn't say that. It doesn't say that. It says, you shall compensate with money. Is it the husband? You pay some kind of compensation. I was just wondering if it goes to the husband.
I think it may in that case, yeah.
For the baby that was lost, and it's not called a baby. For the loss of her child. I don't even know if it says child. I'm sorry, I did not look that verse specifically up. It does not treat this like a murder, as it would in many, many states in the United States. Yes?
Exodus 21, and I think it's verse 22.
Okay.
Way to go.
Exodus 21,
Hoping
verse
somebody would
22. Why don't you look it up
I'm
and
on
you
my
can read
way.
it to us in a minute. It's not mentioned except for that. That is the only time you have any consideration of a pregnant woman and what the problem is if the what she has at that point dies. Did you find it?
Yep.
What's it say?
All right. If men who are fighting hit a pregnant woman, and she gives birth prematurely, and let me just see what the note is on that. Or she has a miscarriage. Okay, but there is no serious injury. The offender must be fined whatever the woman's husband demands and the court allows. But if there is serious injury, you are to take life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, and so forth.
But it doesn't apply
It does
to
not.
the birth. It
does
applies
not apply.
to the mother.
Does not. Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I have heard it applied to that it's the child. I have heard people interpret it that if the child comes out and it's injured, then you apply the life for a life, eye for an eye.
Yeah, and those people are taking things
Out of-
purely on conjecture.
Yes. That's not what the
In
text
the
says, yeah.
actual activity of these kinds of things being decided by rabbinic law, it's the wife who is the eye for an eye, tooth
Yes.
for a tooth situation. It's not hypothetical baby might. That would be in their minds. It would really sound reasonable if they did it this way. But that's not how they interpreted it in real life.
To be very clear, the text actually reads what we would call a miscarriage, not a premature birth.
Not a baby who could live on their own.
Right. That's why I was looking to see what their note was. Yeah. It has to do with a miscarriage.
Can the baby live outside the womb with no attachment?
And the way in which the verse itself is structured indicates that that's one situation. The other situation has to do with a woman. And based on this particular text, as it has been understood by Judaism down through the ages and by the rabbis and tradition clearly, it is always understood this to refer to a miscarriage or to the loss of a potential life. That is financial. But if the woman dies, that is different. That's murder. And while I'm there, let me also say that based on that text and its context, Jewish law has always said that if the mother's life is in danger, and the only way to avert the danger to the mother's life is by what we would now call abortion, then you abort. That becomes a command within Judaism. The mother's life is prior. That's not the best term.
If you can only save one,
The mother's
you should
mother's
save
life.
a mother.
The mother
That
has
is the opposite of Catholic
the
thinking.
mother, right? The mother has priority.
Catholic thinking is, in other words, if you are in a Catholic hospital and this situation comes up, they will always save the baby. They will not save the mother.
Yeah.
And everyone needs to know that because it's not obvious to everyone. And I think everyone should
What
understand.
translation you have there?
I have the NIV.
Oh, okay. I was going to see
Just
if you
in
had
big print.
I was going to see if you had a Jewish translation.
I'm glad that you brought that up, in that there's a very, very strong Talmudic section that says, in the choice between a mother and a baby, the mother should be
Takes precedence.
kept alive and not the baby. As I said, which is the opposite of what many, many, many people say. I just don't want any of us to think that these concepts of when is the egg fertilized, and when is there a baby, when is it living, it's just not that easy to understand, even though we have microscopes. Because once again, life, I would maintain, and I believe the scriptures are going to go along with me, is given by God, not by fertilization. If you want to look towards, well, when's that moment that I know? It's a mystery. It is a mystery.
And in fact, in Judaism, there's been an ongoing discussion as to when it is, as Patrice already indicated, as to when the child is considered alive or considered as being a person. And there's discussions as to what amounts to what we call viability. There are actually some who say 3 days, some who say 8 days.
3 days or 8 days for what? Exactly?
For the child to remain alive.
Oh, after they
Yes,
are
after.
unattached from
I'm
the mother?
sorry. Thank you for clarification.
Okay, that's right.
Yeah. And until then, they're not considered viably a person, a human person. So that discussion is ongoing. And we're not just talking about modern forms of Judaism. We're talking about Orthodox Judaism as well. And in fact, and a number of rabbis pointed this out when all this political hubbub was going on down, when the Supreme Court was playing with the Roe versus Wade issue, that Judaism requires an abortion if that's what's necessary to protect the mother's life. Period. And if abortion then is outlawed, they continue to argue, then that is, how is that described legally? It's imposing something against the religious values of Judaism. And
It's not allowing for freedom of religion.
Yes, right, exactly. It's imposing another religious perspective onto another religion. I have not said that as clearly and as effectively as the rabbis did, but hopefully I've communicated the main point of that. Yes, you're imposing another set of religious values on a different religion. Again, I will say it, Judaism demands an abortion if it's necessary to protect the mother's life.
And that, all these things that we didn't know until the 20th century, that's the aspect of that we know way better, which helps us to make a more accurate decision about, is this going to really affect the mother's life, or is it really not going to affect the mother's life? This we can say with more accuracy, not 100% accuracy, but more accuracy. I was going to say, if you're interested in the Jewish backgrounds of why the Jewish faith has these kinds of concepts behind the decisions that they recommend for women who are pregnant, then you should look up women rabbis, because women rabbis talk a lot about this and what these laws in the United States mean and what they don't mean. And it's they would give you, I'm not saying there's no men that understand it, but they would have, when you have a vested interest in this topic, you would be a woman. I think I heard you say, and I've heard other men say, I really didn't know it was a baby until I guess I was in the delivery room. Is that when it's, I mean, you can watch the foot, going across her stomach, and you can feel and it's still not, but as far as a woman goes, yeah, I would say I'm very, very conscious of that every single day of my life so far. I'm not sure that we should go into anything more.
You said you were going to mention articles for people who might be interested in.
I am more than happy to print out some of the articles that I've received from email lists I'm on. There's a couple really, really good ones. One is from a Jewish journal, and the other one is from a woman rabbi that I think a lot of. And they both go into all of these kinds of issues, what the scripture says and what it doesn't say. In fact, we might do that just so we have it handy in case the topic comes up. Because I hear a lot of blah, 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 on the news and on TV and film clips. And I'm thinking, half the time I'm thinking, you don't know what you're talking about. You are talking about magical things in the air that you are perceiving. And you are not talking about actual pregnancy. So on that topic, in a certain way, I hope this doesn't upset you, the men should be quiet.
It's true.
The men should be quiet. And I think women who have not ever been pregnant, they should maybe be quiet too. That's just my opinion. And Lord knows the ones who talk the most about it, they're men. And the ones who talk the most about fertilized eggs are life. And those are the ones that are trying to convince everybody that birth control causes the death of a baby, which is the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard, number one. And number two, does that mean birth control is sinful? I do not think so. I had one of our friends said to me, well, Catholics, you can't use birth control. I go, I understand that there's discussions about this. Is birth control okay, or is it not okay? She said, well, we'll never. I went, that's the bottom question now. Is it okay, or is it not okay? Is this going against what God wants, which is what many of them would say? Or is it something that God gave us to make our lives better or more, I don't know what the right word is. It's a tool that can be used to improve not just one person's life, but society's life, really. Because I also notice that the group that wants every single baby to be born and they're always alive, and they don't seem to want to pay money to women who can't afford. Married women, unmarried women, it doesn't matter. A lot of people cannot afford a child, more than one child. And this also is never talked about and never discussed. So I think I'm willing to leave it there.
Okay.
But I think we should print out those articles in case people have questions.
Or we can send them by email.
We could send them by email.
If
sure.
people are interested.
Sure,
yeah.
it's fine. They're going to be more technical. They are going to be probably more than you ever wanted to know about fetuses. I don't know.
Now, here's the deal. do not email us at Stump the Stars for that request. Because usually we only look at the Stump the Stars emails a day or two before
Just
Stump the Stars.
a couple times. Yeah.
So,
It's not our daily.
no, it's not our daily routine. So email us at our other email addresses if you want this. More specifically, email Patrice because you've got the access to it. Right?
Yes, I don't have all of them, but I do have the access to
Okay.
a couple of them. Yeah.
All right. I want to repeat just two things.
Like,
One,
please don't be mad at us.
yeah, other than don't be mad at us. Judaism has always said that if the mother's life is in danger, you abort the baby. They didn't use the term abort, but that's what exactly they're describing. I'm actually going to say three things. The term or the process of abortion is not found anywhere in the biblical texts. And then third, speaking of biblical texts, the one biblical text that does in fact directly address this is the one that Jessica found for us. Thank you. Exodus 21, 22, and 23. And if you read the text carefully without trying to import your position into the text simply says this: if a woman is in a struggle, whether she produced it or found herself in between two guys, and she is struck and she miscarries, the person causing the miscarriage is required to pay an amount that the husband considers and the court considers appropriate. If, however, the mother dies, then it's the text has to do with what is often called capital punishment. Right? And that's considered murder. For one you get a payment, for the other
Not even manslaughter.
um
If there's a fight and
Yeah.
something happens and you did not plan to
yeah,
kill that mother,
Fair enough. It's at least manslaughter and maybe more. But yeah, it is. Yeah, for the other you just have to pay up. Hopefully that is clear. That's reminding of some of the things that Patrice has brought out, but those are absolute bottom lines. So
yeah, I just want to give an example of
Oh.
something. Yeah, go ahead.
to draw a conclusion out of that means if you forbid abortion, you are in violation of Jewish law and tradition. Period. Mm-hmm. Okay, good. An example.
The example, I've never heard a man give this example, but women know about this. It's an ectopic pregnancy.
Oh, I was going to talk about that. Thank you.
It's an ectopic pregnancy, which is a pregnancy where the fertilized egg does not make it to the womb. The fertilized egg is stuck in the one of the ovaries. We watched
Is it ectopic or endotopic?
ectopic.
Thank you.
John and I were at a worship service one time when we were very young believers. We were very newly married. And we saw a woman stand up and move to the outer aisle and then collapse. Her husband and a couple of men had to lift her out of this worship service. She had had an ectopic pregnancy, and her ovary exploded. Unfortunately, I've heard men say that that was a pregnancy too. Because if you don't treat an ectopic pregnancy, what will happen? Other than you collapse someplace you wouldn't want to collapse. You'll bleed out. You'll die. You also lose an ovary. So I've heard these unreasonable things when you take the line that life begins at fertilization.
Yeah.
And then I hear people saying ridiculous things about these situations when you put life way, like, I guess 1 second after they combine, then it's life. In a certain way, it blows my mind. not in a good way. And I don't think it's honoring to God either, because you're trying to put your finger on something that is a mystery that you can't put your finger on. And there is a sense of control. If you're blaming a woman or telling a woman she has murdered a baby because she has an ectopic pregnancy, you are way off the deep end. You cannot be defended for these kinds of statements. I don't think men would appreciate being told what they can and can't do with their sperm. I really don't think they would appreciate it. They would giggle. But a lot of women nowadays can actually look a man in the eye and talk about it, even though maybe they can't look women in the eye and talk about what our body parts are doing and how they're functioning. We've gotten to a situation where it's over the top, and the pressure and the guilt all goes to women. And none of the pressure or none of the guilt and none of the responsibility goes to the man. So, with that, is that enough?
I think that's enough.
And so, now if you do not respect me and you find that I've totally gone off the deep end, I'd ask you to talk to my husband and say, we all need a lot of prayer. Women need a lot of prayer when they need to make decisions, and women who have ectopic pregnancies, it's a tragedy. They do lose one of their ovaries. I can only imagine it makes getting pregnant again be even worse. We personally have a niece who's undergoing in vitro fertilization, and God willing, it has been successful.
Yes.
And it's been a long time for her. It's been 7 or 8 years. And luckily, they have made enough money so that they can invest in this, and she's thrilled. But the concept that every time it doesn't take, her in vitro fertilization doesn't take, in other words, attach itself to her womb, then that baby died. Why would you continue to say such a thing? Why? What good is it to do that when you must consider the effect that it has on the woman it applies to? Yeah.
Well, if you strictly define life as beginning at conception, and we have the tool to help people with infertility, taking away that tool because of that particular viewpoint, doesn't that interfere with another mitzvah of producing offspring?
Yes, she is absolutely right. I don't know if you heard it or not. There is a very strong command to produce offspring and to be fruitful and multiply, and then add it on to that. And if a couple really, really wants a baby and is unable to have a baby, which happens, I just want to point this out, even in just the book of Genesis, every single important woman had a problem with conceiving a baby. This is that. Now, they probably would save up enough money to go get
IVF?
IVF. No, that's InterVarsity Fellowship.
No, it's intravenous
Okay.
fertilization also. I had the same thought.
Okay. Just never mind. We're getting silly now. But yes, it would almost be like a commandment. It would be a very, very strong urging of, oh, if you're having trouble conceiving, you better get to where they can help you with this problem, because now we have that. They did not have it, and they suffered because, another kind of guilt, because I can't have a baby, and so it just never fails. It's always the woman's problem. It's always the woman, and it seems like things didn't get better on that topic. They've only gotten worse. I don't think this is what God intends at all. I don't think it's what God intends. But anyway.
Okay.
So it's complicated. We're still in the middle of stuff. I don't know how America is going to go down on this, but not happy with the path it's taking. Let's just put it that way.
Okay, moving from one current topic to an even more current topic.
Yeah.
Huh? It has to do with the last week of Yeshua's life. In other words,
totally, honestly. Turn the page.
But it's all... But, yeah, since that's what was celebrated in large parts of the world just last week. We literally had 4 questions on things related to Yeshua's last week. We're not going to get to all of them. We get to maybe one. I was checking our calendar right now, as of now, although there's a possibility it might get postponed. We are scheduled for our next Stump the Stars 2 weeks from now, which is right before Passover. Oh, wait a second, or is it even during Passover?
I think it's during Passover.
It's during Passover. So,
Maybe not.
no, I think
We'll
that
be having our
I think
family
we're. I think
Seder
we're.
then,
No,
Saturday.
no. Sorry, I'm looking at the calendar. It's just before Passover. First night of
The
Passover.
20th, you mean?
First night of Passover is the 22nd. We are due to meet the 20th.
Okay.
All right, that's different than you had in the newsletters that were sent out. So just so you're aware, 2 weeks from tonight, there is a possibility of an interruption there, but we are scheduled to meet. So that will be also very timely, because even though part of the world celebrated Yeshua's last week, since it was in conjunction with Passover week, then in 2 weeks we'll be preparing for Passover week. So it'll be current for us then as well. All that way of a long introduction that we'll get to the other questions related to Passover week as it occurred in Yeshua's last.
Oh, yeah, there was a couple
Yeah.
questions about that.
I just counted them. 4.
I always think so it gets to be up to, Holy Week, quote unquote, in the Christian calendar. And I always think, I hope John doesn't pull out that old sermon he did about the last week of Yeshua's life.
I almost did.
No, but then I did the sermon.
And then yes.
Yeah, so I'm what's so good about Good Friday. So that's okay. But
the questions relate to
I
that.
always think everybody's heard this so many times that they're like done with that.
Well, 4 different.
I guess not.
4 different questions from 4 different people.
You would think there would be clearer teaching on this from a lot of areas.
And maybe on our parts as well, because every one of these 4 people is connected with the synagogue.
Well, because you teach a lot of this in your seminary classes, but you don't present it in sermons.
Thank you for setting me up. I was going to say, if you want more information, and 2 of my students are smiling back at me, then by all means sign up for the seminary classes. So here we go. This is the one we'll get to deal with. I don't know if we'll get to deal with it completely. Yeshua rode the donkey into Jerusalem while being hailed by all the Jews, Hosanna, or in Hebrew, Hoshana, Hoshanot is plural. Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. We know that the Jews believed in Yeshua. I'm glad that's in the question, because most people don't know that. So, and here's the related and very important question. And so who were all the people that day before Pilate that chose Barabbas instead of Yeshua to be released? Were they the same people that hailed him earlier? Why did this crowd condemn him and the earlier crowd hail him?
And I talked about this. When did I mention this? I didn't talk about it in Hebrew. I can't imagine, but I said, but because everybody, all right, I'm just going to assume that a lot of people have heard the sermon that somebody will give during this Holy Week
Or the
that
Passion
says, the people who showed up on Sunday and said, Hoshana and all that, is the same crowd that showed up on Friday morning, and it just shows how horrible they were.
Yeah.
It just shows how bad they were. And it's false. This concept is false and anti-Semitic.
Yeah.
Yeah. Did you?
Well, then you forget all the hordes of people that wept when.
They
Yes.
don't read that part. They only read the part that they want to read.
Exactly. All right, so do you want to start answering the question, or do you want me to hop in at this point?
No, go ahead.
Okay.
I might add little
Yeah,
things.
please do, in case I forgot. And thank you for mentioning that, Jessica, because that could get lost in the discussion as well, and that's an important part of it. Okay, first of all, let's set the stage. It is Palm Sunday. We know it's Palm Sunday. How? Because they laid out the palms before. Yeah. All right, so it's Palm Sunday. Apart from providing the full background to it, let me simply say that year, the year that Yeshua died, the lambs that were going to be used for the Passover sacrifices for that year's Passover would have been brought in along the same path that Yeshua then followed, through the same gate that Yeshua went through, and up to Jerusalem and up to the temple in Jerusalem.
It's my understanding that that would be the same day of the week every Passover time. In other words, I don't want to say day of the week. I want to say
Same
days
time.
before.
That's it, exactly right.
So 5 days before this happens.
Exactly.
4 days before this happens.
Exactly. And since you raised it that specifically, let me add one thing that I would have forgotten. 5 days before the Passover sacrifices are killed, the lambs are being brought into the temple area.
First, they get washed in the pools of Bethesda. There are plenty of pools there, right at Lion Gate or Stephen's Gate, sometimes it's called. And the pools there is where they used to. They have instead of a car wash, they have a sheep wash, and they walk them through and make sure that they all were presentable. Because remember, they're going to sell them, and they have to be adequate for sacrifice.
Yeah, they have to pass inspection. So, lambs being brought up, Palm Sunday. Yeshua coming in, following the same path, Palm Sunday. Just to be clear, and I'm going to be very brief on this part of it, it's Passover time. Who is going to show up in Jerusalem at Passover time? Jews. That means the crowds that greeted Yeshua on Palm Sunday were all Jews.
Not Israeli Jews, but Jews all over the then known world.
Both. Yes, because those from outside of Israel would have been coming to Jerusalem to celebrate Passover. All right, so this was a Jewish crowd that said, first of all, as the questioner says, Hosanna, Hoshana. This was related to a series of prayers called Hoshanot that were part of the Sukkot celebration. We still do them, and they are addressed to the branch of David, which is a messianic expectation. Then they said Hosanna or Hoshana to the Son of David, the texts say. Son of David was the most common title for the Messiah in the days of the Second Temple. So they're addressing prayers normally addressed to the one who's the branch of David. They are addressing him as Son of David, thereby addressing him as Messiah. And then they say, as the questioner said here, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Baruch haba b'shem Adonai. The rabbis of old would say, if you ever had the opportunity to greet the Messiah, here's how you greet him. Baruch haba b'shem Adonai. So those were three very clear ways in which the text and the authors of the text are trying to indicate that the Jewish people received Yeshua as the Messiah. As is often taught, it is said that the Jewish people rejected Yeshua as the Messiah. The Gospels are trying to make clear that that's not the case, that they received Yeshua as the Messiah. And in fact, the very use of the palm branches was another indicator of that reception. They were used to welcome a great king or dignitary.
Hoshana does not mean praise the Lord.
Thank you.
Sorry.
It means...
Tell all your Christian friends. It does not mean praise the Lord. Hallelujah means praise the Lord. Hoshana is something totally different, really. I mean, it's all a matter of praise, but you said, save us now.
Yep. Save us now.
Save us now.
Save us now, branch of David, the one whom we address now as Son of David or Messiah, and we're welcoming you the way in which we're told to welcome the one who's the Messiah. Baruch haba b'shem Adonai. Okay, so 4 clear indicators just in those couple verses that the Jewish people had received Yeshua as the Messiah, had recognized him as the Messiah. Okay, which is why the questioner says we know that the Jews believed in Yeshua. So then, who were the people that day before Pilate that chose Barabbas instead of Yeshua to be released. Without getting into what day of the week it is, because that was one of the other questions, and there's a whole background to that. We'll do that in a couple weeks. Two questions. Where did this take place? And then who were the people? And the two are interrelated. All right. The where that this took place is a place called Gabata, or the pavement.
Right near where Pilate's judgment seat is.
Right. It's the courtyard related to Pilate's judgment seat, called the pavement. By the way, as Patrice has pointed out in a very perceptive article, that's a term that's unique to John, and it's unique to the book of Esther.
The only two places you find that term are in John and in Esther.
So there's an Esther background to this scene, but we won't go into that. You'll have to ask for her article on that. Okay. In some of our presentations, we have some PowerPoints, and as one of those PowerPoints, we show what it looks like now, one level up from Gabata, correct? The picture.
Yes, one layer.
One layer up.
Yeah, one layer.
Not one level, one layer up.
Correct.
And when you look at that picture, or when you map out the amount of space that's there, then the maximum number of people that could have stood there
At the Pilate seat of judgment which was not in his place. The Pilate seat of judgment was not where he lived, and it's not where his wife was. They lived in Caesarea. He came to Jerusalem to do to take care of these people. That's another thing. People get mixed up. Go ahead.
Okay, so we're talking, and if you crowd it full, like packing sardines in a can, you could maybe fit 100 people in there. Maybe a few more than 100 people.
But each movie, it doesn't matter what year the movie comes out at, when they get to this scene, and they get to the thing where Pilate is having a discussion with Yeshua, and this is the trial scene, it's like an arena. It's like an arena with Yeshua and Pilate are up on the stage and thousands of people. These cameras they bring in thousands of people and say that this is what it looked like. It did not look like that at all. And that's also, I will say, anti-Semitic. It's totally against the truth of what happened there. And it's totally looking to put the blame on all those Jews who said crucify him. It's insidious. Go ahead.
Okay, so if you stuffed it full, you get maybe 100 people. All right. Now, how many people would have lined the streets and recognized Yeshua as the Messiah? Thousands, tens of thousands, maybe even more than tens of thousands, as he followed that well-known pathway. So, on the one hand, you have thousands or tens of thousands. On the other hand, you have maybe 100. Okay? Who would have known to be there before Pilate to show up at Gabata? Would the whole of the city have known that? No. By the way, estimates of how many people came to Jerusalem for Passover time are about 250,000. 250,000. Okay. Who would have known to show up in that place? Well, think about it. And if you read the text carefully, it makes sense. The people who knew that that was going to take place were the high priest and his allies. So who else might have known? People that the high priest and their allies would have told. In other words, it would have been a select group of people. Furthermore, this is the morning before Passover. In other words, that night Passover is going to take place. Where would the people who'd shown up in Jerusalem to celebrate Passover, what would they be doing? Where would they be? They'd be preparing for Passover. By the way, if you showed up in a place such as this, because this was a non-Jewish place or a Gentile place. In effect, you would be, how should we put it?
Not fit to celebrate Passover.
Okay, I was going to use a different framing, but that's perfect. You would have been considered, and we talked about this just a little bit as one small part of the drash from last night. You would have been considered unclean or impure. You would not have been able to celebrate Passover that night. Okay? So who would the people have been? Only those who would have known to be there. Who were the people who would have known to be there? The high priest and his allies, and those whom they had brought.
Well, we're told that some of them were paid to be there. So that eliminates some of the 100 right there.
And again, maximum would have been 100. Number of Jews in Jerusalem at that time, 200,000 plus. Fair enough? So that's who the people are. Now, as Jessica was kind enough to remind us, so where were the crowds who greeted him on Sunday? I think it's Luke 23. As he was being led off to be executed, it says the crowds lined the streets and they wept. The crowds who greeted them on Sunday, the day of Passover, as he's being led off to be executed, they lined the streets to express their grief and their mourning.
And this is a fulfillment of prophecy, if you want me to get
Go.
down and dirty about this, of something that happened to David. When he was an older man and his son Absalom said, I'm riding into Jerusalem, I'm taking over the leadership from my father. My father will be out, in other words, staging a coup. His own son is going to stage a coup. And David said, I cannot stay here. I cannot have a war over me in my own city. So I will leave. I'm giving it to my son. I'm going to give it to him. I'm going to leave. He walks out of town, and there's a whole passage of him walking out of town. It's like 2 or 3 chapters. As he's walking out of town, he has conversations with different people, and he keeps on walking. He's walking toward the Kidron Valley, and he's walking to the east. He's intending to go back out to the wilderness, and people stop him. But when they figure out why he's going and that he's not coming back and he's leaving the city to Absalom, the people lie down and weep because there's nothing they can do about it. The average ordinary citizen can't do anything about this problem. Is this not almost exactly word for word like what happened to Yeshua? On his way out of town to the place of crucifixion, he has conversations with people. People look at him and they lie in the streets and they weep because there's nothing they can do at this point. I mean, if we talk about fulfillment of messianic prophecy, that's a fulfillment of messianic prophecy right there. It's the son of David living through what David lived through.
Okay, so to be clear, crowds of Passover celebrating Jews recognized and received Yeshua as their king, as their Messiah on what was called Palm Sunday. The texts are clear about that. They greeted him as Messiah. The people who showed up in Pilate's courtyard, and let me just stop there. The people who showed up in Pilate's courtyard, maximum 100, maybe not even that many, were those who were brought there specifically by the high priest and his allies. The people, so those were not the ones who greeted him on that Sunday. But those who then found out about what was happening as Yeshua was being led through the streets of Jerusalem, again, parts of the crowds from Palm Sunday are the ones who then lined the streets and they wept as he was being led off to be executed. So hopefully that identifies the various groups of people. And by the way, one footnote to add at this point in Acts chapter 21, at, I believe, I've forgotten which holiday it was in Acts chapter 21. I'm thinking it's Shavuot, but I may be wrong there. When the Rabbi Paul, Rav Shaul, was having a conversation with Yeshua's brother James, or Yaakov. Yaakov, James, says this. They are in this city, Jerusalem, literally tens and tens of thousands of Jews who are zealous for the Torah, who are followers of Yeshua. So, some of those are probably the same that lined the streets at that Passover on Palm Sunday, but just another crowd to reinforce our understanding of what took place on Palm Sunday and in Luke 23, when the crowds lined the streets to weep over his being led off to be executed. I think we said probably enough, and it's that time. Any further questions deriving from what we've covered or not covered?
We've answered all questions.
Okay. Let me just.
What are you looking for?
I just want to see if I can quickly find out.
Acts 21.
Acts 21.
Shall I read these verses from Psalm 22?
Since you found them, go ahead.
Okay, so this sort of relates to what we were just talking about, that previous topic. Psalm 22, verse 9, it starts talking about this topic. David is speaking. He's speaking to the Lord. He said, "You brought me out of the womb. You made me trust in you, even at my mother's breast. From birth I was cast upon you. From my mother's womb you have been my God." This is totally saying the same thing that the rabbis say later on, because it's not, I think the emphasis sometimes is put on that, see, God was with him when he was in his mother's womb. That's not exactly what it's saying. It says, you brought me out of the womb. That's when I became alive. Within that culture, that was the definition. I came out of the womb, and now I'm alive. I'm my own person. You made me trust in you, even at my mother's breast. Once again, mother's breast, nursing the baby, out of the womb, independent life. From birth, I was cast upon you. Once again, birth is an important thing here for David. From my mother's womb, you have been my God. Ever since I left my mother's womb, from then on, you've been my God. So, do I think that God was with David while he was in utero? Sure, I do. But he doesn't talk about that here. He's talking about, from the day of my birth, you have been my God. So that's also a nice section. It's just a nice section to think about for our own selves and apply it, not just to use as an argument, but to say, from the day I was born, God, you've been with me. Thank you so much for your love.
To reinforce what Patrice just mentioned, in Hebrew poetry, it is often based on parallelism. So if it refers to birth in one line, then when it's describing the wound, it's still working from birth, not from fertilization.
Yeah,
now,
I think we can say
in
that.
In a broader sense, in Psalm 139, I think it's Psalm 139, David could say, God, what he's saying there is, God, you knew me even before I existed, and even before I existed, you had your plans worked out for me. Mm-hmm. Not when I was fertilized, not when I was still a sperm or an egg. But
and Jeremiah says the same thing too.
Yeah. So, unfortunately, this text is also used wrongly in the whole discussion we started out with. Now, I did look it up, and I did find it. Yes, Acts 21 is Shavuot. So, a start for me. All right. If there's nothing further, then keep your eyes and ears open to have the 20th, 2 weeks from tonight, confirmed or postponed.
Or denied.
Yeah. And we will see you then, or if not then in May, in this same venue. And we owe the other three people whose questions we didn't get to tonight on Passover week and the events related to it answers, and hopefully On the 20th, we'll get to do that because that will be a great setup for Passover week. Now, not to get anything confused, as I'm looking out there, Barbara celebrated Passover with some friends this past week. Ready? According to the Essene calendar. So it was at the time of the Essene Passover. All of that will be probably somewhat reflected in our discussion in 2 weeks. How was the celebration? How was the Passover?
It was wonderful. It was so blessed. Half of the people there had never attended a Passover. We had children. They were hysterical, chasing after the afikoman. And one of the men was so touched he wept.
Oh, nice.
So it really was blessed. It was wonderful.
Yeah, I always tell people it takes like 4 or 5 times to go through a Passover until you really think you remember everything, and I don't know if I've ever heard that before, and it takes really several times to go through it to really feel like you understand what's going on. That's quite a lot of time spent in it. There's so much stuff. There's just so much stuff in it. Yeah.
And I started a new tradition. I gave money to the child that found the afikoman, but then I gave lesser amount to the child that didn't find it, because I told them that it's important to seek. And if you seek, then you will find. And I want to make sure that she recognizes that that's important too.
Well done, Barbara. Well done. Okay. Would you close for us on that happy note?
I get to.
Yeah, you get to close.
Avinu Malkeinu, our Father and our King, we thank you and praise you that you have given us your word, you've given us wisdom, and you have encouraged us to search the scriptures. I pray, Father, that we would continue to search the scriptures to find the answers for our questions, to receive assurance about how much you love us and how much you are there for us. We thank you for taking care of our loved ones, our friends, and we pray that you would help us to continue to walk in your pathways. Thank you for your love for us. B'Shem Yeshua Meshachenu, in the name of Yeshua, our Messiah. Amen.
Okay. Then we say Shavua Tov. Thanks for joining us.